The wind came up from the south with an old sound in it, as if it had crossed a continent to reach that place. It moved through the tall grass, worried the new wire fence, tapped the clapboard walls, and went on carrying dust, seed, and the kind of voices no one heard anymore. Out there, silence was not emptiness. It was record-keeping. It held everything. Calloused hands, promises made in cold rooms, names spoken softly by those too tired to say them loud. Ellen Hart stood on her porch while morning light found the low hills beyond her fields. Her hat shaded her eyes, but it could not hide the steady look of a woman who had learned to face the world without asking permission. In front of the house, the corral seemed too small for the width of the horizon, and yet it was the center of her life. There was a well, 2 mules, a few thin cattle, a barn patched more than once, and a line of young cottonwoods planted with patience as a person plants the future. The place was not pretty. It was not generous. It was not easy. But it was hers, not only because of paper and stamps, though those mattered. It was hers because her body had paid for it. In sleepless nights, in winters that stiffened water in the bucket, in summers that split the lips, in days when loneliness weighed more than a sack of flour. She had not been born there. She had come from the East, from a place where fences were old and words were polished. She married Thomas Hart because she believed in his decency and because, in those years, hope often arrived wrapped in narrow choices. Thomas spoke little, worked much, and looked at the future the way some men look at a straight road, with stubborn faith that it could be traveled cleanly, without a master over him. When word reached them that land could be claimed if a person lived on it, worked it, improved it, Thomas treated the news like a personal promise. Ellen did not argue. She had learned that some men built their courage out of the idea of distance. They arrived with a wagon, a few tools, seed corn, and a Bible Ellen kept more from habit than certainty. The first years were a steady contest. There was no reliable road, no doctor close enough to matter, no neighbor within less than half a day's ride. When storms rose, the house trembled as if it were made of paper. When the dry months stretched on, the ground seemed to refuse any kindness. And then came the event no one schedules, bargains with, or postpones. Thomas fell ill near the end of a hard winter. It did not announce itself with drama. The West rarely offered theatrical tragedy. It began with a fatigue that did not lift, a heaviness in the chest, a fever that came and went like a poor guest. Ellen tried herbs, compresses, thin broth. The nearest help was a small town 2 days away, and the road was cruel to a man who could hardly breathe. Thomas, proud in the common way of men who believed weakness to be a moral failing, insisted on staying. On the last night, he held her hand and asked one thing only, in a voice so low it seemed to apologize to the air. "Don't let them take it." Ellen did not answer with a speech. She simply squeezed his hand and nodded. Not because she knew how she would keep that promise, but because she knew what it meant. When Thomas died, the world did not pause. The wind kept moving, the cattle lowed. The well still demanded labor. The sun rose as it always had, indifferent and beautiful, as though the loss of one life was a detail. That was when Ellen learned a truth frontier women learned early. Grief could be shelter, but it could not be a home. The next spring, she put her hands to the plow alone. She patched the roof with salvaged nails. She learned to bargain in town without lowering her eyes. When the storekeeper spoke to her like a child, she paid in silence and never again asked for credit. When the blacksmith asked where the owner was, she said, "The owner is buried. The owner now is me." Some men laughed, others looked away. A few, she noticed, kept it like a private insult. The land did not care about laughter. It demanded only work. And Ellen worked. It was the second summer after Thomas died when the first signs arrived quiet, the way threats arrive when they believe themselves civilized. A well-dressed rider stopped at her fence. His horse was large and well-fed, a luxury in that country. He introduced himself as a representative of a cattle company based farther south. He spoke with trained courtesy, like a man unused to refusal. "Mrs. Hart," he said, consulting a notebook as though her name were a number, "there is interest in acquiring this property. The offer is fair. You would have the opportunity to begin again somewhere more." Suitable. Suitable sounded like judgment. Ellen heard the meaning beneath it. "This is no place for a woman alone." "It isn't for sale," she said. The man smiled, but it was a shallow smile. "Everything is for sale, ma'am. Sometimes it only takes time." He left as neatly as he came, raising little dust. But he left something behind all the same, an invisible track, like a mark in the air. In the following days, Ellen noticed small things. A stake knocked loose, a gate left partly open, fresh hoof prints near the well. None of it was an open assault. It was instruction. It was the indirect language of men who preferred their victim to convince herself there was no choice. She began sleeping with one ear awake. At night, the wind seemed to carry footsteps that were not there. In town, she heard talk. The company some called it Barrow and Madsen, though names shifted depending on who spoke, was gathering land, linking grazing ranges, controlling access to water. They had money, influence, and friends where it counted. People said the law in the West was measured by the size of the purse that carried it. Ellen listened without interrupting. She had learned that information came in crumbs, and that fear fed on what went unsaid. One afternoon, leaving the general store with flour and kerosene, she noticed a man leaning in the shade beside the building. Tall, lean, unshaven, with tired eyes. He did not look like he was looking for trouble. He looked like he had already seen too much of it. He spoke without ceremony, but not unkindly. "Are you Ellen Hart?" Ellen did not answer at once. Out there, names were doors. "I am," she said at last. "They call me Silas Reed." The name was not unfamiliar. Ellen had heard it in low conversations. A former lawman, pushed out after a case that never settled cleanly. Some said he was too honest for the job. Others said he was too proud to admit a mistake. The truth, as usual, likely lived between. Silas nodded toward her supplies. "I heard they're circling your land." Ellen's voice stayed even. "I've heard the world wants what doesn't belong to it." Silas's mouth tightened, like she had touched a thought he carried. "They won't stop with polite talk." "Then I won't stop with work," she said, and moved to pass him. But Silas stepped with her not to block, but to walk alongside, offering shade where there was little. "I didn't come to tell you to run," he said, lowering his voice. "I came to tell you, if you stay, you'll need witnesses. You'll need someone to write letters, carry messages, record things. A company like that thrives where no one sees." Ellen stopped. Smoke and manure and sun-baked wood drifted on the air. The town was small, but it had windows that watched. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Silas hesitated, as though honesty cost him. "Because I've watched land taken with pretty words. I've watched good people pushed off their own doorstep, and afterward nobody says anything. And because it's your land. Not because I say so, because you paid for it." Something tightened in Ellen's chest, not hope, not yet, but recognition. As if someone had spoken aloud what she repeated to herself when nights grew too long. "I can't pay a man to guard my name," she said. "I can barely pay for salt." Silas gave a small, humorless smile. "I didn't ask to be paid. I asked you not to be alone with the silence." She did not trust him immediately. She would have been foolish to. But in the West, caution also needed courage, so it did not rot into fear. The following week, the quiet pressure sharpened. One morning, Ellen found part of the fence cut. The cattle drifted, and she spent hours gathering them back, throat dry from calling. That night, someone knocked at her door, not with the force of a neighbor asking, but with the insistence of a man demanding. She opened it only enough to see Two men stood outside, hats low, faces blank. "Mrs. Hart," one said, "the company offers a final agreement. If you accept, you'll have money and passage east. If you refuse, you can't say you weren't warned." Ellen felt fear climb her spine, but she did not let it into her voice. "Warned of what?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if indulging a stubborn child. "That the world isn't kind to folks who stand in its way." She thought of Thomas, that last night. She thought of the plow, the young trees, the well dug by their own hands. She thought of what surrender meant, not only losing land, but admitting her life could be pushed and pulled by other men's convenience. "The road is mine," she said. "If the world wants to pass through, it can go around." The men exchanged a glance. There was no anger in it, only calculation. After they left, Ellen locked the door, leaned her back against the wood, and breathed as though she had crossed an icy river. She did not cry. Crying was for later, when it wasn't dangerous. The next day, Silas returned with a simple plan. Record everything. Dates, details, names. Send letters to the county judge, to a newspaper in a larger town, to the local federal land office. It was not a guarantee, but it was light. They count on darkness, Silas said. They count on the idea that a woman alone can be erased without noise. Ellen agreed. But inside her, a conflict remained that no letter could settle. She did not want to become a symbol. She wanted only to live. At night, riding by lamplight, she thought about how morality shifted out there. Back east, people spoke of law as a fixed pillar. Here, law was like a fence, useful, but it stood only if someone kept it upright. And often the hands with strength to hold it belonged to those who already had everything. One afternoon, returning from the well, Ellen found a woman standing near the corral. She was small, sun-warm, with a headscarf and a basket of eggs. Ellen recognized her faintly. Mary Caldwell, a widow living several miles off. Mary was not the visiting kind. Her presence meant something. "I heard," Mary said, offering the basket the way a person offers peace. Ellen took it. The simplicity of it nearly undid her. "I don't want you hearing it from other mouths," Mary continued. "They came to me once, too. Not with money, with threats. I gave in." Ellen said nothing. Mary looked down at the ground, as if the words were buried there. "I thought I was doing right. I had a small boy. I was tired. I wanted to sleep without jumping at every sound." She swallowed. "But after I gave in, rest didn't come. A different emptiness did. Like I handed over part of what I was, and no one could give it back." Ellen felt an old anger rise not toward Mary, but toward the kind of world that made women pay invisible prices. "Are you telling me to fight to the end?" Ellen asked. Mary lifted her eyes. "I'm telling you, if you fight, don't fight alone. And if you lose, don't lose in silence." They stood a moment, listening to wind in the young trees. The West was full of men talking loud, but the hardest decisions were often made in low voices between women. The turning point came when water became a weapon. One morning, Ellen drew a bucket from the well and saw the water had turned cloudy with a strange taste. It was not dramatic. It was not immediate sickness. But it was enough to make the body recoil with suspicion. Silas looked, smelled, and set his jaw. "We don't drink that," he said. Water was life. Without it, cattle weakened, crops failed, the house became a shell. Ellen felt the world tilt. This was their method, then. No broken door, no public dragging. Just life made impossible until surrender looked like choice. That night, she sat on the porch with the lamp turned low, watching the stars as though they were witnesses. Out there, loneliness was not simply the absence of people. It was the feeling that if something happened, the universe might go on without even a footnote. Silas sat at a respectful distance. "You can go," he said gently. "No one would call it cowardice. You've done more than many men would." Ellen pulled her shawl tighter. "If I go," she said slowly, "where do I go? To rented rooms? To cooking for someone who looks through me? To hearing that I was lucky to get any money at all?" Her voice changed not into hardness, but into truth. "I lost Thomas. I lost time. I lost youth. I lost things I can't even name. If I lose this too..." She stopped because the words hurt. "I don't know what's left of me." Silas stayed quiet. Then he said, "Then we'll do what the law ought to do. We'll bring eyes. We'll bring people." The next morning, they rode for the nearest larger town-long, tiring miles taken in stages. Ellen hated leaving her land for even a day, but she understood that some battles were fought with presence, not weapons. They reached a courthouse made of wood and dust, where the judge, a man with a trimmed mustache and tired eyes, listened with measured patience. Ellen presented her papers: the homestead claim, tax receipts, her husband's death certificate. Silas presented notes, dates, neighbor statements. Mary Caldwell came too, an act of courage that trembled but did not retreat. A company representative appeared, as though he had been waiting, a polished man with boots too clean for that street. He smiled like a man entering a room he owned. He spoke of progress, efficiency, the better use of land. He spoke as if Ellen were a sentimental obstacle in the path of an inevitable future. When Ellen was called to speak, she stood and felt her throat tighten. It was not fear of men. It was fear of being reduced to a case, a curiosity, a footnote. Then she remembered the wind, the cut fence, the ruined well. She remembered Thomas's last request. "Your Honor," she said, "I ask no favor. I ask you to recognize what is already written. This land was claimed by my husband and by me. It was worked by our hands. I paid taxes. I kept to the terms required of me." She looked at the company man without shaking. "They speak of progress as though it were a train that cannot stop. But I say this: progress that must crush a widow is not progress. It is appetite." The room went quiet. The crowd was not large, but something rare was there: honest attention. The judge did not decide that day. He asked for time. In the West, time was always a kind of currency. But the trip had an effect. Rumors spread, and with them inconvenience. A company disliked light. Back home, Ellen found the house still standing, but the air changed, as if the land itself knew the struggle had ceased to be hers alone and had become public business. It brought relief, and also a new weight, a feeling of being watched, judged, expected. In the weeks that followed, there was a quiet. Not peace quiet. Ellen repaired what she could, filtered water, hauled from distant creeks when necessary. She worked as she always had. And as she worked, she felt anger turning into something steadier, determination made not only of pride, but of grief transformed. One night, Mary came again, this time with her little boy. He looked at Ellen the way children look at stories. "He asked why you don't leave," Mary said, with a sad smile. "I told him there are things a person can't abandon without losing their name." Ellen touched the boy's hair gently. The gesture brought an unexpected memory. She and Thomas, young once, still believing the future was simple. After Mary left, Ellen stood in her doorway a long time and understood something. They had almost taken more than land. They had tried to take meaning, to convince her that her life could be pushed aside for convenience, to make her believe she had been born to yield. The outcome came without spectacle. One late afternoon, Silas arrived with a sealed letter. His horse looked tired, but there was something in his eyes, a restrained light. Ellen wiped her hands on her apron and opened the letter carefully, as though opening a fate. It was the ruling. Her claim was recognized. The company was warned to cease interference. The land, at least on paper, was protected. Ellen read it twice, as though understanding required repetition. Then she sat on the porch step with the letter in her lap. Silas said nothing. He knew victory in the West was seldom pure. Ellen looked toward the horizon, where the sun was lowering. The ruling did not bring Thomas back. It did not erase the nights of fear. It did not undo the permanent feeling of vulnerability, like an invisible scar. But there was something it gave her, something she could finally feel. Confirmation that her life had weight enough to resist. "They'll come back," she said, not quite a question. Silas drew a slow breath. "Maybe not here. Maybe not with this name. But forces like that don't disappear. They just learn new ways." Ellen nodded. It did not despair her. It made her clear-eyed. That night, she slipped the letter inside the old Bible. Not from devotion, but from respect for what it symbolized. A document kept between pages that spoke of suffering and endurance. Before sleeping, she went out again. The wind had shifted. The young trees moved, and their sound was like distant applause or like counsel. Ellen stood there alone and, for the first time in many months, allowed herself to cry. Not from triumph, from exhaustion, from longing, from everything she had hardened to keep going. The West demanded hardness, but it charged a price for tenderness. And yet Ellen realized something. She had not become stone. She had only learned not to break. When winter returned, she was better prepared, not because the land had grown kind, but because she had learned to live without asking it to be. She kept planting, mending, writing. Mary came more often. Other neighbors, encouraged, began to trade help. Small gestures started to form an invisible net not large enough to change the world, but enough to keep one person from being erased easily. Sometimes, when the wind came up from the south, Ellen thought of Thomas. Not as a ghost, but as part of her private landscape, as a voice that did not command, only reminded, "Don't let them take it." With time, Ellen understood that what they had tried to take was not only a tract of land. It was the idea that a life can be removed for convenience. It was the temptation to believe certain people were born to yield. The Old West is often told with noise gunfire, chases, famous men. But the human cost of the West was often carried in stories like hers. A woman facing forces larger than herself, learning that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision not to surrender one's dignity when fear seems reasonable. In the end, when night covered the prairie and stars appeared like ancient eyes, Ellen Hart did not see only emptiness. She saw a record, every post driven, every tree planted, every letter written with unsteady hands, every choice made without guarantee. If someone asked what she gained, she might not call it victory. She might call it staying. Because staying in that country was a quiet kind of redemption, not grand, not loud, but human, made of small acts that told the world, "I was here. I worked. I loved. I lost. And I did not let myself be erased." And the wind, which took no side, kept moving on, carrying dust, seed, and stories. Some were lost. Others found listening ears years later, and reminded people of a time when land was not only ground, but fate. And that the Old West beneath its legend was most of all this, a place where the price of remaining was high, and where some paid it anyway, so the world would not become a map drawn only by the strong.